Good evening, and welcome to our interview this evening with Tam Hunt, candidate for County Council District 4. Conducting our interviews tonight are
State,
Gabe
House,
Katz.
House district.
state
Oh,
house.
it's House District
House,
4.
yes.
Sorry about that. I don't know why I said House District 4.
Yeah.
Conducting our interviews tonight are Gabe Katz and Clara Mason. Before we start, I'd like to offer a little bit of information about HULI PAC. We are a group of grassroots community advocates volunteering our time to HULI PAC. Many of us have witnessed during oral testimonies the problem of being the minority voice, observing seated representatives voting against the āina, or the majority of testifiers. The majority rule currently allows the continuation of colonial structures, corporate rules, and methods over Ike Hawaii for āina and its people to thrive. We must collectively understand the individual power we carry as Hawai'i Island residents by getting involved. Our first question tonight is going to come from Gabe Katz. Go ahead, Gabe.
All righty. Well, thank you again for the time, Tim. I know
Thank you.
we're all busy, and as we said, we're a volunteer organization, but it's just nice to set some time apart and get to know you a little bit. So, in that vein, I want to start with something regarding your personal values. What has inspired you to run for office this election cycle? And can you describe your core values and how those values apply to Hawai'i Island's future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been an activist and policy advocate for a couple decades now, quite some time. It's not a new thing for me. And I've been, the gadfly from the outside saying what's happening is just wrong and getting really upset about the state of the world and the state of the āina, the state of Hawaii, and realizing, well, we need new leadership. And so if not me, who? And so finally realized, well, I need to step up myself and be part of that new generation. So I really kind of felt like it's just, my duty, my service. You may agree that current leadership is rather insane at various levels of our power structure. I'm just really sick of it. So I want to get in there and do what I can to change it. In terms of my core issues and my values, my campaign mantra is local food, local power. And I mean that literally. We need a lot more local food. We're dangerously vulnerable to world events. And it makes a lot of sense to grow more of our own food for nutrition, for affordability, for building community, all the reasons, and also building resilience. And so my whole approach is building resilience and building our economy at the same time. And so by investing heavily in local food, local energy, green housing, we actually create new industries, create new jobs, good paying jobs, attract more investments here, and create better community. So it's kind of a braid that weaves itself together and creating a much stronger Big Island, much stronger Puna. My values in general, I've always been very interested in protecting the environment. I grew up in Northern California in a rural area, and then also Washington State in a rural area with two parents going back and forth. I've been in Hawaii now off and on for literally 30 years. I was training here as a military kid in my early 20s at PTA, which is how I came to the Big Island. Fell in love with the Big Island when I was there at PTA. We'd do dock duty, and we'd spend some time at Kauai before and after and travel around the island when we had some downtime. I'm looking around like, this place is really amazing. And I had an idea to come back here at some point and be a writer. And lo and behold, here I am a bit later, and I am a writer. And I'm also a lawyer and an activist. And so putting my values to use. And I do want to kind of say, without being too grandiose, that really what guides me in general is kind of this deep understanding that the world is built on love. And I mean that literally, love, capital L. Not God necessarily, but maybe some kind of God, but love as God, love as source. And everything I do is guided by that vision of being a guiding love and affection and attraction at the root of all things.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tam.
Thank you for
Appreciate that. So kind of around just what you've been saying about your past work as a lawyer and working at PTA. What experiences have you had regarding those things, and other life experiences have you had that qualify you to run for elected office, particularly in Hawaii?
Well, I think the key job of a House rep there's kind of two key things. One is to help make law. That's kind of the first, duty. And the second is to be responsive to constituents for their daily concerns and needs and help them navigate the complexities of state law and state bureaucracy. And so on the first one, I've been helping write law for a number of years now as an activist and lawyer. I've written many bills for different people in the legislature currently, have had a fat 0 pass so far, and it's probably why I'm running, because I found out it's extremely difficult to get laws passed here. I'm still not sure what the special sauce is that makes them pass, but I need to get in it to find out, because what I'm working on in terms of electric vehicle policy and green energy and local food and things that I would think would be very sensible and should be passed very easily are not passing. And so I'd say my experience in working with current leaders in the legislature qualifies me. My experience as an activist for 2 decades now, as a policy lawyer for 25 years now, I'd say make me qualified to be a lawmaker. In terms of being able to help constituents navigate state bureaucracy and their personal issues where a lawmaker can step in and do some help, I'd say that's where I have less experience, but I can certainly step up very quickly. And I have partners here already on the ground. My campaign manager, many of the people who are helping me in the campaign can help guide me on those issues. And I have been here now full-time over 10 years. And so I know a lot of the issues that face Puna in general. So I feel pretty qualified by being someone who's lived here for quite some time to be able to figure out what the key issues are by talking to my neighbors and my friends, people who live here, and help resolve those issues by being in the legislature.
Thanks.
Cool. So Tim, you mentioned local food, local power as your mantra or your primary campaign focuses. Aside from these, what would you say is the most pressing social issue in your district? And what are some solutions you have in mind to address that issue?
Yeah, well, I have to address what's just happened. You guys surely have heard. It's been national news. We just had a triple murder, and the murder was apprehended just hours ago. And so I'd say public safety is certainly top of mind for me and a lot of people. And, I have to admit, this isn't one that I think about a whole lot, because as, a male and, fairly big guy, I don't really fear for my safety generally personally. And so I think it's good to be able to kind of recognize that no matter who you are, weird stuff can happen sometimes and people can go off the deep end. You need to be very careful. And I think looking at what came out in just today's Civil Beat, where this guy was actually literally just let off the hook for restraining orders by 2 women that asked for a restraining order. They were denied. And then literally the same week he goes on a killing spree, would suggest is maybe some things need to change with our current judicial system regarding TROs at the very least. I will, when I'm in the House, obviously talk to police chief and other safety officers around the island, and especially in my district, and figure out what can be done to make us all safer. But I'd say in general, Hawaii is fairly safe. We do have a low violent crime rate in general. So this is an anomaly, but a very crazy and sad anomaly. More generally, beyond local food and local power, green transportation is a huge one for me. We are dangerously vulnerable on imported oil. We import all of our oil. Obviously, we don't produce any oil here in Hawaii, and that provides about 95% of our transportation needs in Hawaii. And so again, if anything serious happens in the world, in a very, increasingly precarious world, we're kind of screwed. And so we need to get off oil quickly, like really quickly, next decade or two. And that's quick for that kind of thing. We are seeing electric vehicles ramp up pretty quickly. We're seeing about 20% annual growth in EV sales. It's nowhere near fast enough. We need a lot more EV chargers. I drive electric myself, so I know this very intimately. We need a lot more EV chargers very quickly. That can be done quickly. That will be the first thing to spur people who are not homeowners to go electric. More generally, we need good governance. We need transparent governance. We need to have the leaders really accountable to the people in a very real way, not just like occasional town halls and nice to see you kind of thing, but actually having far more accountability. And I will mention right now an idea I've already kind of publicly stated I will follow. And my mantra here is that representative democracy is so last century, and that we actually have now new tools with online voting and discussion platforms and even mobile phone voting, where we can poll constituents in real time on specific issues. And that could be, and in my view, should be turned into actual voting in real time. So Hawaii is rather strange. We don't have the initiative, referendum, or recall at a state level. For a progressive state, it's a really bizarre omission in our state structure. So what I have promised to do is to put a number of issues that I'm looking at in the legislature before my constituents to discuss and actually vote on, and I will follow their vote as they vote online.
Awesome. Thank you for the thorough response. We'll drill into a lot of the particulars, but I'll turn it over to Claire for the next question.
You're on mute, Claire.
Switching gears here a little bit. What are some of the complexities with regards to making housing more affordable, and what are some of the solutions you believe are viable?
Yeah, housing is not very affordable because we don't have a fast enough approval process. We have too high construction costs. We have overly complex codes that don't fully reflect that they're in the tropics. To address some of these issues, I've already been proposing through my nonprofit work an idea we're calling innovation zones in lava zones 1, 2, and possibly 3, where it really makes sense to actually relax building codes a bit, because those areas are, of course, much more at risk from lava. And I know this very intimately. I lost a house in 2018 to the lava flow in Leilani Estates. So this is a real thing. When you come here as an outsider, you're like, is that real? I'm like, yes, it is real. A lot of people lost homes in 2018. And so the innovation zone idea would relax building codes in a way that makes sense for those zones. And it would start with, ohanas and less, sorry, I got a mosquito buzzing around, and less complex and less, let's say, consequential buildings. So we can kind of test the system and see how well it works over time. And then over time, it could be extended to actually, small dwellings, and basically just make it a lot cheaper and easier to actually build small homes, beginning that way, using local materials, ideally using bamboo, hempcrete. I've been talking to various partners and other activists who've been looking at these things for many years. We've held webinars from my nonprofit. We're actively pushing these ideas for local green buildings and local green building materials as an industry to actually create jobs, but also having actual materials locally we can use to build real homes, et cetera. And so there's a lot there. I'll add this small caveat. I have not experienced this personally, but I have heard more than once that part of the problem with the building codes is that the building industries often push the codes to be more complex and more demanding, because that is, in fact, where their bread is buttered. The more complex, the more they can charge, the more difficult it is to build them, the longer it takes, the more money they make. And so I think there's a dialogue that has to happen there to actually allow for reasonable relaxation of building codes in the tropics, in more risky lava zones, in a way that actually can be, feasible and desirable for all parties concerned.
Cool. Thank you, Sam. Moving back, I mentioned we're going to drill down into some of the particulars. So here we go. I have a question here on responsible energy resourcing. So you are outspoken against Big Island's dependency on imported oil for our energy needs. What should be done about the use of fossil fuels for our electric grid, given the current state of federal subsidies on renewable energy? And how do you foresee Hawaii transitioning to 100% renewables?
Yeah, another great question. So this is kind of my core expertise is green energy. I've been doing it for 25 years now. And so we're wrapping up a deep analysis through my nonprofit Think Big, looking at exactly that question. I'm part of the mayor's new energy task force, again, looking at exactly that question. How do we get off oil? How do we get off fossil fuels in general in a way that actually makes sense financially? Also, we can't ignore economics here. The good news right away is that doing this, getting off fossil fuels, will actually save a lot of money. And this is a lot of people think it's actually more expensive to go renewable. And that may have been the case 20 years ago. It's not the case today. Solar and battery storage are actually a lot cheaper now than grid power. Electric vehicles are, when you look at the life cycle cost and the fuel cost, quite a bit cheaper than gas cars, especially when gas is $6 a gallon and diesel's $7, whatever. So if you can actually have solar panels on your home or your business and charge your car as well as your house on electric, you're going to be saving a lot of money. And you'll be saving so much money, you probably can pay for the monthly lease payment or loan payment for that car. It can be that big a savings. Depends how you do it. So I'm not saying in every case. And obviously we aren't all homeowners. So one thing we are looking at is actually how to create microgrids for areas that have more apartments, have more renters in general, so that those microgrids can then translate the savings from solar and battery storage to people who can actually put them on their own roofs themselves. So there's different ways to do this. And the good news is we're actually heading to 40% solar already on this island. We have 2 large new facilities over in Waikoloa and Waimea, both 30 megawatts each, with battery storage, and they were built in the last couple of years. They provide 15% of the island's solar power already. And we have almost 25% from rooftop solar already. So this is actually an incredible figure. It's the highest in the state. So we're actually competing in a friendly race with Kauai to get to 100%, the fastest. Kauai has the advantage of being a co-op. They went co-op 20 years ago. So they used to have the highest rates in the state. Now they have some of the lowest rates and also some of the highest amounts of renewables. So they're showing in real time that renewables can, in fact, save money for ratepayers. So I'd say it's a combination of a real strong focus on solar power, battery storage, and electric vehicles, electric buses. I've also proposed, as just an idea at this point, what I'm calling solar rail, which would be a solar-powered electric light rail from Hilo to Kea'au. Just an idea at this point, and I got a lot of feedback on Facebook on this. So we'll see where it goes. But I think the cool thing nowadays is that solar power has become, almost free. I'm not kidding. When you look at the life cycle cost and the cost of panels and batteries, it's literally almost free. And so that's a pretty amazing thing to have happen, where we're now having too much solar power on the grid at times. So he goes like, oh, sorry, no more solar power on the grid midday. We have too much already. That's a very good problem to have and very different than 20 years ago.
Are there any other alternative sources of energy that you might support besides solar?
Yeah, I support wind power. I think North Point, Hawai'i area and South Point are appropriate. And there's already 2 farms, one in each of those areas. I wouldn't mind seeing some expansion in a responsible way in those 2 areas, which have very good wind resources, some of the best in the nation. And that power is actually also very cheap. The downside for wind is that it is a bit more visible and it tends to arouse a bit more opposition, whereas solar power is barely visible. It's quiet, no emissions, obviously. Hydropower can be done and is done on the Big Island in a small way, some run-of-river facilities over in Hilo. I'm very intrigued by wave power. I'm actually looking at an idea for what I'm calling Post Park, Puna Ocean Science Technology Park, down in Kapoho on the new lava land, which would be a sister facility to the host park in Kona, which is Nelha and Host Park, just north of the airport. And they focus on marine science and energy research. So the wavy area at Kapoho Point would actually be very appropriate for shore-based wave power and what they call ocean bobbers, where they go up and down in the water. Again, no emissions. The tricky thing is that it's very rough on machinery, as you can imagine, in that kind of wavy environment. So there's no large-scale commercial wave power facilities yet available, but I think Hawaii is a good place to test that. Last, I'll address geothermal, and I think PGV has had a lot of issues. I am amazed it was approved in Lava Zone 1. That seems rather foolish in retrospect. I do not support expansion of PGV. I think it's in a very dangerous area. In 2018, it came within this close of being destroyed, and that would have just devastated the whole island's grid because it's a large amount of the power. I do support looking at geothermal in other areas, but in general, I don't think we need it. It's actually not very cheap. It's kind of expensive. Solar power and battery storage is a lot cheaper. So when we have readily available technologies like solar and battery storage that are already here, cheaper, much less controversial, it seems to me like the no-brainer.
Thank you. Next question.
I was just going to interject, Jeff. I know we have more to get to, but since this is such a big topic, I worked in renewable energies for a number of years, Tam, specifically building automation systems. I kind of want to just pick your brain for another second on this topic of, do you think the bigger offender is the producer or consumer for our oil-based energy? And I asked that in the vein of, like, in Kauai, for example, I worked on a building automation system for Kauai Beach Resort. They had super antiquated equipment prior to this upgrade. What are your thoughts on that, on incentivizing building automation systems or other means of improving energy consumption?
Well, energy efficiency is kind of the stepchild of energy resources. It's often overlooked. It's just not very sexy, unfortunately, and it should be. It's kind of the no-brainer you should do first. So they call it negawatts. So negawatts, negative watts, because you can with things like, more efficient light bulbs, automation systems, basically use, technology in various ways can save a lot of energy. And unfortunately, a lot of facilities in Hawaii are still not using up-to-date technology. So yes, I fully support that. In terms of who is more culpable for our current system, the consumer or the producer, I hate to, assign blame, but I think it's, as usual, it's a mix, right? I mean, I think people could be doing a lot more in general. We are doing a lot more here in Puna, where I live. I go to the gym here in Pahoa, sometimes pretty early morning, and I overheard a conversation which really gave me a little, tickled me, because it was all about this guy bragging about his new solar and battery storage system on his roof. I'm like, what a cool conversation to overhear at the gym. It's not exactly something you hear probably in LA too much, but here in Puna, it's bragging rights to see how much solar you have. And in general, I was joking with my guys that work for me here, on various building projects, that nowadays I measure my wealth in solar and batteries. And I'm not even kidding about that, because that to me is real wealth. And, if the world has anything, really serious that happens, which certainly could, I mean, I don't want to present, the future as being that dire. I hope it's not. But I think it makes sense for us to prepare for those kind of possible futures where maybe the boats do stop coming. I think it makes sense to understand that is a possibility, and to prepare for it in a way that also makes sense in terms of savings, community building, better health, etc. And so just to get back to your question, I think a lot can be done at the policy level, and a lot can be done at the individual user level, and we need both. We need top down and bottom up.
Thank you for that kind of anyway, I'll pass it off to Claire. Thank you for entertaining me, basically. Go ahead, Claire.
Thanks, you. So you said your campaign slogan is local food, local power. How would you support sovereign food production on island for producers and consumers? And do you have an example of an agricultural or food security project in your district that is working?
Yeah, you guys are asking great questions. So I'll tackle that also kind of in a top-down, bottom-up manner. And so again, through my work with Think Big, we have been doing exactly that. And so I'll start with the bottom-up. We are finalizing a series of educational flyers we're calling Prep, Set, and Forget. And we are working with a couple partners who I won't name just yet, but we're looking to put these out fairly soon. And they basically are designed for each major climate zone on the island. And they discuss 10 crops that you as a homeowner or business owner can prep, set, and largely forget. And the forget is in quotes because you don't want to forget it entirely. But the idea is you can basically create food forests fairly easily if you know what you're doing and plant the right plants. And I've been here long enough, and I've tried planting long enough, and have had various gardeners come through enough times to know that it's actually not that easy growing things here in the tropics. In Puna, we have very little soil. Kona, in some parts, has very little rain. You have a lot of fungus and bacteria and insects and things you don't get in the mainland. So a lot of mainland crops just don't grow here very well. So you have to know what to grow and how to grow it. And so these flyers basically give you a really nice, easily accessible set of information to allow you to grow up to 10 crops on your property in a way that creates a food forest, creates abundance, creates beauty, creates community, helps you get out in nature and get your hands dirty, etc., and then have food to eat in a year or two. On the top-down approach, I wrote a bill this last session called the Strategic Food Reserve Act. And I had a bunch of sponsors, and it went through the first hearing in the Senate, actually. And everyone that spoke about it, maybe except one, was actually very in favor. And like the whole agricultural industry showed up. I was really surprised because this is kind of I didn't do a lot of outreach to get those people to show up, but everyone showed up, and almost everyone spoke in favor. It got referred to the next committee, and it promptly died. And so I have no idea why Bill, at this time of all times, when we're facing an oil shortage of this we've never seen before, and potentially fertilizer shortages that we've never seen before, that they would not advance that bill. I'm befuddled. And again, this is partly why I'm running, because I think we need to have leadership that recognizes that the world is a crazy place right now. And like, what are you doing? Like, I'm literally like holding my head in my hands, like, what are you doing? You're not.
Can you explain the bill?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't explain it.
No
So,
worries.
so what it would do would actually require the state to create a food reserve on each island sufficient to feed the island's population for X days. And it would actually require you buy a percentage of locally produced food. And then before it expires, if it's perishable, you rotate it through to local food banks.
Mm.
So it creates a guaranteed market. It creates security. It creates food for the indigent. What's not to like, right? And somehow it doesn't get out of committee. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm just like, what are you doing? You know, you had support from everyone, and this bill makes like perfect sense. I'm rather biased, but everyone else agreed, and yet it did not pass. And so these kinds of things, whereas, you know, top down, bottom up, I think can actually do a lot once people start to realize, and we've done this now so many times, you know, the pandemic and the Ukraine war, now this, but we don't seem to really get our act together. I'm really hoping that the silver lining from the Iran debacle is that we really do take this seriously and recognize the world is a fragile place. We are very, very vulnerable here in Hawaii. We need to get serious about this stuff.
Thanks.
I'm going to switch gears over to public safety / environmental stewardship. It's kind of a combo question. Fires and severe weather continue to be a threat on public safety. In just your district, in parts of Puna, a severe weather event could mean days of road closures that prevent residents from leaving that area, both in the event of an evacuation and in the aftermath to go out and get food or fuel or what have you. What do you believe can be done to better secure our residents and lands from these threats?
Yeah, another great question. You know, I'm not going to claim any expertise in fire suppression. You know, it's not an area I've worked in, but I do live here. I have followed, of course, the fires that have happened over the years. I take it very seriously. And I'd say the last few years with the fires that have happened here, I've realized that, you know, one thing I took for granted living on the Hilo side, which, as you may know, is the wet side, that I thought we couldn't have fires here. But I now realize you go a month without rain, it changes dramatically in a month, you know, so fires could happen here, I think, pretty quickly. And with climate change and just the climate weirding, you know, even Waimea, where a big fire happened a couple of years ago, you know, half of Waimea is very wet normally, the other half not so wet, but we had a big grass fire there. And so I think, you know, part of it, you know, is obviously making sure that when grasses do grow up because of very wet events and then die back, and you're left with a lot of fire tinder, you need to have some way, and that's what happened in Lahaina, of course, and also I think the Waimea fires. You need to have some way to at least monitor that. I don't know what the best solution is to resolve that kind of fire tinder effect. There is, you know, one area I've worked with a little bit in my policy work, and this is what they call power supply prevention shutoffs, PSPS events, which came from California because of all their wildfires. And they basically decided it was better to shut off power lines in really windy episodes in those areas and lose power to people than the risk fires coming from those, because it happens so many times. And of course, that's what happened in Lahaina too. And so now Hawaii does have a PSPS policy. Hasn't been used to my knowledge where I live yet. But I do support this. But in general, also, microgrids are a good way to resolve this, because you can still shut down parts of the grid, but then have functioning grids if you have microgrids that are basically, they call it islandable. And so you can actually be another island on an island. And so I'd say this is a complex issue I'm going to look into more. And I'd say I'll just stop right there because I'm not an expert in this area.
No worries. Thank you for that response.
Thanks, Tam. So speaking of other types of grids, many residents in your district and others commute to work in Kona and Hilo. This usually requires people to own their own vehicle, to carpool, or try to catch a bus. In your opinion, is the infrastructure pertaining to public transportation working? Do you believe residents require a car to meet their basic needs? And what do you believe would be a viable alternative to our current system?
It's a complex mix. And so I'd say the current system is not working very well. I'll focus on the Hilo side, you know, where I live, because what I know best. And so, you know, Hilo to Keau and to Puna is classically really bad traffic in rush hour, because a lot of people work in Hilo, the big city. it's probably why I proposed the Sunrail idea. And this again is the solar electric light rail that would go in the existing median from Hilo to Kea'au. And I'll just say right now, some feedback I got on this was like, look at Skyline on Honolulu. Why would you think about rail? And just to be clear, this is night and day. This is existing median solar light rail over 7 miles. It's night and day from a elevated train on massively costly concrete posts through existing urban areas. This is a different ball of wax entirely. More generally, we do have a bus system, but it needs a lot of improvement. I tried to take the bus back from Kona the other day, and I waited 4 hours, and the bus never came. And so this apparently, I was talking to people at the bus stop. They're like, "Yeah, this happens a lot." So if you can't count on buses that come at all, being late, okay, it's one thing. If they don't come at all, I'm not going to try and take the bus again. That to me was like an experiment that failed. And so, I have no one I'm going to point a finger at. I don't even know what happened that day. But clearly, to make the bus a viable option, it's free. It's a great thing to have. We actually have now 4 electric buses, which is great. So our MTA is getting ahead of the curve, and they are decarbonizing. And that, of course, saves money because that's a lot cheaper to run on electric than it is to run on diesel. But it has to be reliable. That's kind of the first rule, right? To be able to be a replacement for your car, it has to be reliable. And there's a classic problem in public transit is the last mile problem. If you can't get to where you're going, then you've got to walk a long way, or you've got to bring a bike, or you've got to pay for an Uber. That makes it much more difficult for a lot of people. And so, then this again is this is early concept ideas, but the solar rail idea, Sunrail idea would basically get most people that want to take the Sunrail from Kea'au to Hilo, and within, I'd say probably 10 years at the earliest, this kind of thing takes a long time, we will actually have robotaxis being very prevalent. I have no doubt that will be the case. I think they're going to start showing up here in a couple of years. They're already, of course, in cities in the US, in Austin and SF and LA. Dozen cities now have robotaxis. Will be a bit delayed here in Hawaii because of approvals and because of being a smaller, urban area. But the combination of public solar-powered light rail and robotaxis is actually very powerful and can be all powered by electric, and therefore a lot cheaper and a lot more reliable and a lot more personalized. So that solves the last mile problem, and it solves the decarbonization problem, and it solves the oil import problem.
I want to ask a follow-up, but I may just email you separately, Tam, because I know we have a number of questions to get to, but I would like to pick your brain a little bit more there. But just shifting gears yet again, I have a question regarding government efficiency and follow-through. So there were a number of major water lines affected in your district by the 2018 eruption. You yourself voiced that you personally witnessed homes be destroyed. It sounds like maybe your home was affected by this eruption. Basically, for these water lines, there was an estimated completion date originally for 2023. That then shifted to 2024. It's now slated to be completed by the end of 2026. The goalpost just keeps moving for the completion of those repairs. How do you plan on ensuring follow through from county or state officials on these big issues?
Man, you guys are asking really good questions. Short answer, I don't know. I don't know what the source of the delays is in general, other than just Hawaii time. But I think, maybe one, starting point would be to find a way to ensure that estimates that are put out there are double checked and discussed thoroughly before they're put out there. Because I think it's probably better to actually give a realistic date and timeline than to just issue something that sounds good and that keeps on slipping. Because people get very frustrated and they lose confidence in government or contractors, as the case may be. Obviously being in Hawaii, it's a more difficult environment than on the mainland. But again, since this is well known as an issue, I would hope that we'd be getting better at putting out accurate timelines and better at meeting timelines. And so since I haven't worked with these, large contracts, I'm not going to really offer more than that at this point.
Yep, fair enough. Thank you for that answer, though.
You're muted, Claire.
Tourism has proven to not be a reliable economic sector as our kind of sole foundation for our economy here. What industries within your district do you feel we need to further support and or develop to move towards a more circular and diverse economy?
Well, this is my whole thing. So local food, local power, green housing, green transportation. And so I'm a big supporter of ecotourism, voluntourism. Obviously, tourism is complex here in Hawaii because it's both kind of the lifeblood of the economy, but it's also the source of irritation and annoyance for a lot of people who live here, especially people who've been here for generations. So I think we need to be very cautious in proceeding with anything that actually is designed to increase tourism. I am looking at proposals to create more parks in Puna and in particular more campgrounds. You know, we're as big as Oahu in Puna itself, and we have literally 0 campgrounds right now. We have one at Isaac Hale that is supposed to be operational, but isn't, and it's been 8 years now. It's supposed to be operational by 2028. That'll probably slip again. I'd like to see 3 or 4 campgrounds, but again, I want to make sure the community agrees those are, you know, good things to have and to do it in a responsible way. We are getting new roads. Apparently, they're going to be finished by next year in terms of Poiki Road, Kapoho Road. These are big things for the local economy and just for ease of transportation, but they will also attract more tourism. And so I'm hoping it can be done again in a way that's responsible and respects, you know, people who have lived here for a long time. I'm optimistic about the new green fee. And so partly what I'm looking at for these new parks, and I mentioned earlier the Post Park, the Puna Ocean Science Technology Park, that could be paid for, at least in part, with a new green fee, which is, you know, just put in place last year. And so there's various ways we can do this. I think, you know, certainly more discussion around hotel zones, STVR zones, et cetera, needs to happen and is ongoing. And that's, of course, a dialogue with the county and the state, and in some cases, the feds too. In general, though, the Big Island, I think, is big enough that we can do it in a way that does respect all the interests and does still create new jobs, brings more money to the area, brings, you know, investments we want to see. There's a lot of proposals that have come and gone because people didn't like them. There was actually a proposal for a space flight facility just north of where I live in HUP, and that didn't go very far. It was intriguing. I went to their presentation up in Hilo at Naniloa, and they gave a, you know, bit of a dog and pony show, but I've not heard of it for 6-7 years now, so I think it's pretty dead. So I'd say that's probably the kind of thing that people in the east side don't want. But I think, you know, things like parks, things like more local ag, things like commercial kitchens, things like more solar power facilities to actually get us off fossil fuels. These are investments that make sense and actually can help things like ecotourism and help build a responsible and really thriving economy.
I'm going to bring it back to affordable housing. So you've spoken a bit about this already in the interview. However, I want to drill down on a specific sector about affordable housing. On this island, we've seen many cases of people buying a house or several houses to use explicitly as a source of income through vacation and or short-term rentals. By extension, we're currently experiencing a housing crisis with our growing population. What are your thoughts on the laws as they exist now with regards to short-term rentals? And what would you like to see change in the future, if anything?
Yeah, it's a complex one for me. I do have a hosted rental, and so you know, I'm a little biased on this one, but I think again it can be done in a way that allows families to make some extra income, but doesn't, you know, ruin the quality of life for the neighbors. I think the current one-size-fits-all approach is kind of draconian, and the rules are always evolving in the last few years. And so I follow this closely because, like I said, I do run a hosted rental. There are a number of new laws in process and new registrations coming down the pike, and it's not even clear when we have to register, et cetera. But I would just urge lawmakers, and I will do this when I'm a lawmaker, to not impose one-size-fits-all solutions. I think we need to really consider the needs of all people around the island. And I was somewhat dismayed when the county used a study from Maui as the basis for their policy put in place a few years ago. And fortunately, since then, they have completed a study for the Big Island, and it did not actually support the conclusions they found on Maui. So again, that really highlights the need to have a specific mindset for not only the Big Island as a whole, but also looking at different areas and how will the new laws affect each area. You can't just impose that one size fits all, let alone one state fits all approach.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So this goes to clean government and ethics. We've seen a lot of large corporations and lobbyists donating to campaigns for political candidates. Fortunately, we just had the big win with Citizens United, but what do you think should be done to further reduce corporate influence on our local elections? Do you have any thoughts on increasing transparency around campaign funding?
Yeah, this is a really important issue area, and one I've already proposed some ideas as part of my campaign. And so I applaud the legislature for passing the new bill that attempts to redefine corporations for Hawaii state law as a way to essentially weaken Citizens United. And we'll see if it is upheld by the courts. I hope it will be. It's just a huge problem. I mean, money in politics is the root of all bad policy. And so what I've vowed for my campaign as part of my effort to improve things is that I will not take donations over $99 from anyone. I can take a donation up to $2,000 by law. I'm going to keep it a 1/20th of that. So yes, it's harder, but it's part of my philosophy that is at the core of who I am and my campaign. I'm also committed to partial public financing. That's what they call it here in Hawaii. So basically, Hawaii state matches funds. After you reach a certain point, 1,500, they give you 1,500 for the primary, up to 33, I think it is. And then they do the same thing for the general. And so by committing to that, I'm also committing to expenditure limits. So it's basically $23,000 as a limit. And so I'm a huge fan of those two things, and I'm putting it into practice in my campaign. And more generally, I think Hawaii is quite good on reporting. I'm learning about the rules as we go, and they're quite strict on how to report things and what you need to do for all campaign advertising, et cetera. So certainly I'd say Hawaii is quite transparent about where the money is coming from. We think we can do better in terms of how much money is allowed still to be used by politicians, particularly if you're self-financing. There's almost no limits. I could have self-financed my campaign and really face no limits. I think that can be a problem in general. We haven't seen it too much in Hawaii, unfortunately, but we're seeing it, for example, in California. Tom Steyer is a billionaire, basically self-financing. He's actually progressive. I actually generally like his ideas, but I'm kind of generally allergic to the idea of billionaires being in politics because I think it's just like, dude, you just have too much power and you shouldn't be allowed to be in the system with that much power and not the support of your fellows and your colleagues. And so I would like to see in some manner Hawaii step up and impose stricter expenditure limits and offer a more robust public financing. And in fact, they are. A bill gets passed. I think the governor has not signed it yet. That would change the 1-to-1 match to a 5-to-1 match. And so rather than getting $1,500 when I reach that limit that mark for my fundraising, I would get then $7,500. And so that would be a massive incentive to stay in the partial public financing system. I'll leave it at that.
Who are some of the groups that have endorsed you so far?
I'm new in the campaign, being 3 weeks, and so you're the second group I've talked to. The Sierra Club is still deliberating, and I'm optimistic they will actually endorse me. I think they are going to issue their decision next week, and so fingers crossed.
Excellent. Okay. Next question.
Sure. This next question is with regards to our economic culture here on island. Residents rely heavily on goods from large corporations such as Costco and Walmart to afford their groceries. You've already voiced some ideas to incentivize people to source locally, but that is not yet viable to meet the food and other household needs of all residents. So if we are to continue relying on these megacorps, what are some ways you think we could mitigate their harmful effects they have locally, such as excessive plastic packaging, without driving up costs to our residents?
Yeah, I've been pretty happy to see, at least for for bags, starting somewhere, that plastic bags have been effectively banned here, unless you buy, of course, the dollar version that's reusable, which I do support because you can use them, 1,000 times. And then other than that, they have brown paper bags that you had to pay, I think, 10 cents for in most supermarkets. So that's a big start, and that kind of took off around the country and around the world as a way to reduce the plastic bag waste. That's, of course, just one small component of the overall system. I have been part of the movement for zero waste here in the Big Island and in Hawaii more generally, and basically responsible cradle to grave production techniques. So essentially, when we create a product, you're looking at ways in which it will be disposed responsibly and not just end up in landfill and wasted. And so I'd say this is a thorny problem. I was in dialogue maybe 2 years ago with Nicole Lowen, the Energy and Environment Chair in the House, about a bill, basically it's called Extended Producer Responsibility, EPR. And that was going to basically say, look, if you're selling stuff into Hawaii's markets, you need to follow XYZ rules to make sure your products don't end up in the landfill when they're dead and becoming waste. That got watered down, unfortunately, and I haven't heard in the last year where it went, but I believe it's in the study process. I believe they're looking to basically produce a report that says, well, here's what we can do. And so in general, I think we can and should urge companies to avoid single-use plastics as a very basic rule. It gets very tricky, though, in terms of recycling, because, of course, the recycling market fell through the floor for plastics in the last few years. And that's not Hawaii's fault. It's not the U.S. fault. It's not even China's fault. Just the market's changed, and China stopped taking those plastics. And so I'd say, I look forward to the report from the EPR bill to see what we can do in Hawaii on the specifics, and in general, isolable, reusable, upcyclable products.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Back to affordable housing. Hawaii Island's population is increasing year over year, and we continue to see home prices increase disproportionately. What are your thoughts on urban development as a means to counteract the housing crisis, and how does that intermesh with the preservation of natural lands?
Yeah, I think it's always better to build up rather than out. And let's see, Kona, Waimea, and Hilo are, obviously our main population centers. And I personally wouldn't mind seeing taller buildings allowed in those areas. But in general, I'd like to see more infill rather than building out. We are a big island. We've got plenty of space, frankly. I'm not sure that I like the model when you drive south of Kona with a number of small towns that almost blend into like one town. I think rather than infilling those communities, I think it's probably better to infill in the urban areas. But at the same time, I'm not trying to decide what those communities should be doing. We do have community plans for each part of the island, and I'm not expert in any of them. But in general, I want to see more urban infill than suburban sprawl. I think that's a pretty good rule. And of course, you can actually create more thriving communities, more walkable communities. Watch out, Kitty. Kitty's trying to jump up here. Than by building up and infill than building out. And so I'd say in general, we need to be very careful. I'll add as a final note that the Big Island is actually gaining some population, but most parts are losing population. And Puna is, based on current demographics, the only part that's actually growing. And so where I live in HEP, there's a lot of new houses going in, but that's not the case in most of the Big Island. Most of the Big Island and most of Hawaii is actually losing population. And so, yes, urban sprawl is an issue in theory, but given demographic trends, it's not, I think, at the top of the list.
Yeah, I just want to touch on one of the things you said there about the population decreasing. I think we see an increasing population of people moving who are not from here, and a decreasing population of people whose families are gonna have been here for generations. And so how can you combat that as an elected official?
It's a really tough one. I think certainly affordable housing is probably the key one. And then second would be more accessible transportation, lowered fuel costs. And so I've addressed, affordable housing to some degree, but I'll add to that by saying I think we need to have, obviously the governor's made this a top priority. But these kinds of things take a long time. And I think there are things we can do in the meantime in Puna and the Big Island more generally to build more affordable housing by, for example, relaxing building codes, by growing local building materials, by using the local eucalyptus, for example, on Hamakua Coast. And there are efforts to, by a local company, to build an OSB manufacturing facility from that eucalyptus, which would be a major building material that can be used locally and hopefully quite a bit cheaper than your OSB from wherever else. So I think there's ways we can address that issue, but it's certainly not going to be an easy thing. This is a kind of a generational issue that's gotten worse over time. And I think also if we can create these new industries I'm talking about, local food, local power, more affordable housing, and then get more jobs from those industries by really incentivizing industries, and then getting more investments, and we actually have people with enough money to stay here if they're actually from here and don't want to leave here. Thanks. Not easy. I'm not trying to be easy at all. These are very tricky issues.
One last question. The elephant in the room, we've identified that there's a lot of need for different infrastructure projects and affordable housing, but a lot of this comes down to budgeting and finance. And it's been said that the state government just doesn't have the adequate funds to provide those financial needs for the infrastructure. What ideas do you have to meet those needs financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One example at the county level, the county just changed the property tax brackets where they gave most homeowners a slight savings, and then they actually increased the property taxes on homes, I believe $4 million and up. And so, I think 800 homes or so, that added $17 million approximately to the county budget. And so the state has a rather strange taxation system where we have fairly low income tax, but then most of the state budget is funded by the GE tax, general excise tax. And so obviously you could, in theory, increase the GE tax. I'm not advocating that, but I'm saying that's one way to get more funds. But I think things like the green fee are on the right track. The green fee makes sense to me. It's a voluntary thing. You choose to come to Hawaii, you pay the green fee. No one's making you come to Hawaii. It's a pretty modest amount in terms of what people spend overall, and it's reserved for environmental issues. I think there may be some way to mirror that and use it as a model for the affordable housing piece. I don't know exactly how that might work, but I think there may be a way to kind of do a similar thing at the state level to actually create a fund to really ramp up affordable housing in a way that makes sense. It's gotten kind of crazy. And obviously the Big Island and Puna in particular, and the East Side in particular, is quote unquote affordable for Hawaii. But for people who live here and grew up here, it's still extremely expensive and getting more expensive. And so it's really becoming a crisis. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said there, but I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay. Well, thank you for participating in this interview tonight. It's Tam Hunt. He's a candidate for State House, District 4. We really appreciate you joining us. And thank you also to our interviewers, Gabe and Claire. One thing I always do at the close of these interviews is encourage everybody that's watching, everybody that's going to watch, to get out and vote. And not only vote, but discuss these really important issues with your friends and your family. And, that's the best way that you can participate, is discussion and voting. So please vote. A little bit more about HULI PAC. We were born from a shared drive to rework our system by seeking indigenously, progressive-minded, āina-based, equity-focused leadership for our Hawai'i Island community. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are willing to circle back to our roots and instill real change to regenerate and transform our Hawai'i Island community. For more information, check out our website, hulihi.com. That's HULIHI.com. Thanks again, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you. Aloha.
Nice meeting you, Tim.
At HULI PAC, we envision a future in which our Hawai'i Island community is empowered to elect pono leaders, nurture our relationship with āina, and inspire environmental, social, and economic well-being.
Our mission is to endorse and support candidates and office holders of integrity who serve āina and the people of Hawai'i Island. We do this by interviewing, researching, and ultimately vetting candidates and incumbents who are running for local office.
All of our interviews are streamed live so that you have the power to make decisions off of substance rather than a familiar face or a name. We must move forward and encourage voting based on righteous qualifications and a backbone to stand up for what is pono.